Welcome to Behind the Competition, the official podcast of the SAE University programs. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm Mike Sorg, the media and podcast producer with the SAE CDS program, here with another episode of the show. With me, of course, my co-host, Scott Schultz. You know his face and voice, of course, from CDS Action News, if you're catching that on the stream, too.
They better be.
Subscribed.
That's
You're
right.
all subscribed to all the things and all the great interviews you're doing over on the TikToks and
Instagram
and other social medias.
Yeah, it's exciting. We do fun stuff.
You sound excited.
Well, I have one tone and it's monotone.
That is true. Well, it is an exciting day because we have a new guest, a new face around these parts at SAE. Joining us is the Community Programs Manager, David Sander, with us today with SAE University Programs. How you doing, David?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Here, I like to start the interview with a let's get weird question. So are you ready to get weird?
Sure, no problem.
All right. So what animal would you want to impersonate perfectly?
Ooh, that's a tough one. My son has asked me this question in a slightly different light, but it would have to be an orca. And the reason is, I love how intelligent they are, but I love that they have kind of a community that they live within. And so I also love water sports and, boating and stuff like that. So they all kind of capture that element together. So that would be my favorite animal that I would want to impersonate.
I like that. When I thought about this question, I thought for me a dolphin. And so I guess I'll see you in the ocean.
Something like that.
Let's start with a little bit about you. Where'd you go to college?
So I started out at NC State back in the 90s, and I actually started taking classes in their engineering programs. And about a year into it, I was taking some of the required courses. One of them was a drafting course, and our drafting teacher took us down to what was then known as the technology education department, and they kind of showed us the labs of what the students were doing down there. And basically they were training to become pre-engineering teachers. So, the department eventually changed to technology, engineering, and design education. And so that's where I kind of got my foot really in the door to become a teacher. And, when I saw it, I was like, this is exactly what I've always wanted to do. I didn't even know this existed. So I moved away from taking a lot of the harder engineering classes, and I started taking the education classes, which included a lot with psychology and communication systems and such like that. But, so I was a teacher for 28 years. I retired in June, and I joined the SAE team in October. So that's kind of a very, very short version of my education to career to second career history.
So tell me about that transition, obviously being a teacher for so long, and then, what was the appeal of getting involved in these programs with SAE?
As a matter of fact, when I was taking my very first engineering classes at NC State, there were some posters up in the hall about the SAE programs. So they had like an interest meeting for the Formula team and an interest meeting for a Baja team. And they really didn't have a team that had been formed, with, prior members that were passing on their knowledge. It had kind of dissolved, and there were a few engineering students that were juniors and seniors that wanted to kind of rekindle it. So they posted a few posters around, and I came to the interest meetings, but nothing really came of it. So again, when I shifted to the education space, I wasn't in the same hallways and I wasn't seeing those posters anymore. So I never went to any more meetings, but I knew what the programs were about. So towards the end of my career as a teacher, I actually was on LinkedIn, and I saw a post about the SAE Formula event up in Michigan. And it just kind of like hit the light bulb of, hey, I wonder if they're hiring. Let me see what's up. And sure enough, they had a position available, and I was like, yes, absolutely. So I threw my application into the ring, and the rest is history. So that worked out really well. It came full circle, so to speak.
I was going to say, that's a nice little full circle situation we got. And what did you teach? Were you college, high school teacher? What
I
subjects?
was a high school teacher and I taught technology, engineering, and design, which is kind of like pre-engineering. So a lot of our content was project-based learning. We did a lot with robotics. We mainly did Vex robotics, but we had some other robotics platforms that we did early on. Before Vex robotics even existed, we did a lot of stuff with radio control components, just some off-the-shelf RC components to try to build some, almost Frankenstein robots. And then we also did a lot with renewable energy. Being a CTE teacher, a lot of the things that I look for are, the future jobs that my students might be transitioning into out of high school. Not every student is necessarily going to go into college, though I had plenty that went off to become engineers and, researchers and everything else. But, not every student is going to take that path. And so I was looking at, hey, renewable energy is definitely, at the front page news, and there's a lot of careers coming out because of that. So I started out with a little bit with wind energy, but here in North Carolina, there just really isn't a lot of wind for that market, except on the coast. And so North Carolina, they created some policies to develop some large industrial scale solar farms. And through that, I started infusing a lot of solar education into my renewable energy lessons. And I kind of scrapped the wind energy. Not that it wasn't a great lesson, it was awesome. And my students had a great time with it. But the solar energy was a much better fit for our particular state and the future workforce. So that was kind of where I was going with that. But we did, a ton of different projects. One of my big capstone projects that I like to talk about was back in 2001 to 2008. My students participated in a program called EV Challenge, where we took an existing automobile that maybe had a blown engine or whatever. We scrapped all of the internal combustion parts out of it, the muffler, the radiator, the air conditioning system, everything, and we converted it to a full-size EV. And we mated a forklift engine to the transmission. We put in a motor controller for that, the motor, and then we also had lead acid batteries, which were the only things that we were really allowed to use per the rule set, but they were only thing that was not cost prohibitive for us to use also. And lead acid batteries have a terrible energy density to them. So the car really didn't drive very far, but it was a lot of fun to drive because it was super quick, and we put the batteries as low as possible, so it had a crazy low center of gravity. And I mean, it was a great project for my students to be involved with. We competed against some other high schools regionally here in North Carolina, and just had a great time. There were other elements of the competition as well. The students had to interface with design judges very much like they do with SAE. They had to do some prepared presentations. They had to develop a website for marketing elements. And then, we had to do an autocross with the vehicle as well as an endurance event. And again, the endurance event, for our particular car wasn't amazing, but the autocross, it won trophy after trophy after trophy because it was a really good chassis. And, like I said, my students did a great job.
I know I've seen you out at a couple of competitions as of this recording, out at Aero Design and one of the workshops for Auto Drive Challenge. So what's your vibe so far seeing some of these events in person?
Well, it's very much like what I was doing with my students. Again, we did a lot of competitive events. So I was the advisor of our TSA chapter. TSA is Technology Student Association. So I was the advisor for that. And then I also volunteered for different events with that, whether it was photography or animatronics or system control or architecture. So I'm used to the competitive event format. And then again, with our EV Challenge program, very, very similar to a lot of what they were doing. And same thing with robotics. So our Vex robotics team, we went and competed against other high schools, and, there was a whole arena set up and, volunteers and, PA system, everything. So it's very similar, just obviously at a different level. The college students, they're sitting there working, with, computational fluid dynamics to analyze their product, and they do a lot of simulation before they actually produce their vehicles or their projects. Whereas my students, they might have done some design work within like a drafting program, whether it was SolidWorks or Inventor or whatever the case might be, and then we would fabricate that product. There wasn't a whole lot of simulation involved before we got into the actual fabrication. So, but it's great to see, like I said, all of the different stages that the students kind of elevate to once they're at the college level. And I actually was just at the Carolina Section Student Night down in Concord, and they were giving their presentations. They had a slide deck together with a lot of visuals from their CFDs. They had a lot of marketing that they had done. They had, a lot of, cost benefit analysis that they were working on to try to streamline their vehicle, and then also for the, the weight savings reductions that they were doing. They really had a lot of, goal setting, but also, they did a lot more with simulations than we did within my classroom.
Mike, let me tell you about the SAE Sustainable Mobility Career Center. It's the premier career portal for sustainable mobility. Can you believe that?
I can't believe it. And in addition to having access to hundreds of job postings, you can also browse monthly articles and sign up for job alerts.
Well, that's almost too good to be true. From what I hear, it's the best place to find what's next for you after college. Mike, where could they sign up?
You can sign up at sustainablecareers.sae.org or just click on the link in the description of this episode.
All right, so talked about all the work that these college kids and even the high school ones you touched on, but what do you think makes these competitions so successful for the participating students?
Well, definitely from a student perspective, it's what I call the hook. And that was always, something that we were taught within education is, you got to hook the students somehow. And to have a competitive event that is very exciting, that is, something that is relevant to what they're going to be doing in the future. It might be at a different scale, it might be using different materials, but it still forces them into that critical thinking area where they have to solve a lot of problems. And that challenge and that curiosity is really what pushes these students to want to do these events. Again, the events wouldn't be possible without all the volunteers that, provide the personnel and the workforce, at the site. I mean, there was a whole army of people there from Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, as well as a few other companies that came out and supported Aerodesign just this past month. But, we have the rules committee that develops the rules so that, again, it's not the same thing over and over and over again. It kind of forces the students to think critically about other areas of their design that, maybe they weren't working on previously. So it gives them a lot of avenues to work on. And then, of course, the funding from the sponsors helps all aspects of the event, from the setting up the facilities to making sure that we have all of the materials available during the event. We also, push out all of the notifications on our applications, and, we have a PA system there so that the students aren't lost and, trying to figure out when they're supposed to be doing something. So again, that funding really kind of paves the way for these events to take place.
And that's a great note for everyone listening to download their competition app, because that's where you get all the important information and reach for success.
So, you talked a bit about the students and the sponsors being a big part of this event. It's really kind of almost a partnership to pull it off, right? So what are the biggest perks for both the students and the sponsors involved in this event?
Well, from a student perspective, the students are obviously, in these very rigorous classrooms, and they're learning a lot of theory, and, they don't always get to actually see the application of what they're learning. Whereas these events provide a perfect venue for them to apply those, what they've learned in the classroom into a product that they can go out and test, and again, they'll do a lot of stuff with, simulation and validation, but they also, go out and actually crash a few planes, or they, break a few welds from their suspension on their Baja vehicles, or whatever the case might be. So they learn by doing, and then the other aspect is they learn by failing. None of these events are made to be super easy. They're made to be challenging and very hard, so that when they do walk into their first job, they realize that they've learned a lot along this pathway, and not all of it is roses. There's going to be some trips and hiccups, or whatever you want to call them, and the important aspect is to learn from those, so that as you progress as an engineer or as a professional, you take that knowledge with you, so that you don't keep repeating those same mistakes. And then from the sponsors, again, whether it's the student nights or whether it's the events, the sponsors have a very curated, concentrated mix of applicants for whether they're doing internships or co-ops, or they're looking for a full-time employee. The idea is that they have this really, really concentrated group of highly motivated students that have gone beyond the classroom. Here again, the students aren't getting paid to do this, and they're doing it not just as a resume builder, but because it's fun, because they're collaborating with team members, and they're actually getting to test the waters, and to see what it is that they've been learning about. So the sponsors really have a great avenue in terms of recruiting these students for future employment.
So these events for building a car, building airplanes, building Baja cars seems expensive. Do you have any advice or tips for maybe some teams with less funding and support from their school?
I wrote probably well over 100 grant applications as a teacher. So grants are always an opportunity that they can look for. Another program that's actually within our SAE ecosystem is the foundation. So the SAE Foundation has an opportunity for students to do what they call Learn Twice. And it's where they can volunteer for high school or middle school schools in their area, and they can provide either some guidance or maybe some insight as to project management, or maybe helping them with some pre-engineering level concepts that they're working on, whether it's for Science Olympiad or for a robotics club, or whatever the case might be. So there's a lot of different avenues that the students can do with regards to that Learn Twice program. It's focused on schools that might have an element of the Learn Twice or the SAE Foundation educational curriculum that they are using. So that is something that we're hoping for, but not every school has that. But the Learn Twice program does enable students, once they reach a certain number of hours that they volunteer, they can get reimbursed for some or possibly even all of their registration fees for the team. So that is something that a lot of teams don't even realize is an opportunity for them. So that is a great thing within SAE, that the funding just gets shifted over for the registrations.
Did you ever have a Learn Twice student or team come to your school?
No. Again, we aren't exactly adjacent to NC State, and NC State would be the closest college that has an SAE chapter. But we never had any Learn Twice students come in. We did have a few volunteers, but they were mostly adults that came in, but very, very few college students ever came to my classroom, unless they were being a student teacher or a teacher intern at the time. We do have a couple other things, so in terms of the cost to actually operate these teams, they get progressively higher depending on what program they're in. So if a team really doesn't have a lot of funding, aero design is a great entry point in terms of being able to do something. You don't necessarily have to be an aerospace engineer to do aero design. I know that is kind of what it's designed around, but mechanical engineers can absolutely do it. Again, you're working with electric motors, so electrical engineers could be a part of the team. And then, of course, you bring in marketing, and you bring some other components in there as well. As you go from that to Baja to Formula, the prices get progressively higher, not just in terms of the materials that you're buying for the product, but also your team tends to get bigger because you need more diverse skill set, and therefore travel gets more expensive. And then, we haven't even really touched on the auto drive challenge. Whereas auto drive, we kind of have 10 teams that are part of that program, and we really don't have anything to expand that as of yet. And so those 10 teams are kind of locked into doing it. And, fortunately from that aspect, our sponsors are providing a lot of the funding for those teams to participate. So that's not something that they really have to worry about as much as, say, a Formula team or a Baja team or an Aero team. But it is still, something that they have to be concerned with. But it's not as much, depending on the funding levels from the sponsors and from the colleges.
Actually, I had a few conversations at the recent Aero design from some of those smaller teams, and it's really interesting to see, what that accessibility has kind of afforded them there.
That's another barrier. We were talking with a professor from Howard University, and he was mentioning about funding and facilities are some of the biggest barriers that teams have to face. Obviously, aero design, the planes can get very expensive depending on what you build them out of, but they could also be very cheap and still be successful. You can build them out of 3D printed parts or laser cut parts. Out of some natural materials. You don't always have to go with carbon fiber and titanium everything. So there are ways in which you can cut your cost in terms of fabrication. But then also facilities, some of the airplanes are fairly good sized, but you don't need a garage door to drive an airplane through. You can pick it up and carry it through a normal classroom door in some cases, whereas with a Baja vehicle or a Formula vehicle, you're going to have some kind of roll-up door and a facility that can house such a large vehicle in addition to all the tools and equipment that you need to fabricate that with. So again, it escalates very quickly as you move up from just funding to also facilities as being, kind of the barriers to entry within the different programs.
For Clean Snowmobile, there seems to be less teams and even less snow. Are there any plans or ideas to revamp the competition?
Well, we were very fortunate this year that we were holding the event at Michigan Tech. And if you didn't know, Michigan Tech has a research facility, KRC, that we typically hold the event at. And that's where the paddocks are. They have a building set aside for that. But Michigan Tech also has their own ski hill called Mont Ripley. And we were able to shift where the dynamic events were being held from KRC down to Mont Ripley, just because of that connection that they have through their university. They were able to say, hey, we can make this work. We want the teams to be successful and have an opportunity here. So that was a really big, lifeline that they threw us to make this happen this year. So I couldn't be more pleased with how Damon was able to pivot and handle that and make the necessary changes. And again, we had a whole team here that was shuffling paperwork around to get our insurance straight and everything so that we could actually move the sleds and get them out there on the ski slope. So that was fantastic. But in terms of the platform, there are quite a few challenges with snowmobiles because the sleds are kind of defined in size by industry. Like, you really can't make them a whole lot wider. You can't make them a whole lot longer. So that kind of limits the design envelope that you're working within. And industry has already made huge strides in sound abatement as well as the pollution that they produce. So, there is kind of a limit as to how far you can take that technology and really keep pushing it to make the sleds even cleaner. Obviously, using different types of fuels is a way that we can go. We're looking at using biofuels and or e-fuels, and there's a slight difference between the two. Biofuels are not chemically identical to e-fuels. E-fuels are just a chemical synthetic buildup of hydrocarbons that allow us to create a renewable fuel from using other elements and just bringing them together instead of using fossil fuels. So we are looking at using different types of fuels to possibly keep that program in place. And again, the name itself makes sense. It's Clean Snowmobile Challenge. Well, here again, if we're using cleaner fuels that are not fossilized carbon, then it's definitely a good place for us to at least go down that path and see what we can make work. And so there is work being done on that.
Well, you talked a lot about kind of the changes in fuel and clean energy and stuff like that. There's always been talks of the competitions potentially moving away from the IC engines and into electric powered vehicles. Do we expect to see more of that coming? Obviously, Formula is already stepping into the EV space, but Baja is another one with the question. It's still running the old IC engine. Do we see any kind of future implementation and movement, or leaning more into it in the case of Formula in the future?
Well, that is a great question, and I will have to say that when you look at industry is not just sticking with IC engines for the sake of sticking with it. They're doing it because we need an all of the above approach. And again, you hear that all the time, whether it's in a podcast or an interview or whatever. There's no one magic bullet, whether it's fuel cells or EVs or whatever the case might be. Those are never going to solve 100% of our problems within transportation. So we need all of the weapons that we can bring to bear on this in order to solve those problems. And biofuels and e-fuels are definitely going to be researched, and they're going to be brought out in industry. And again, there's going to be a lot of major players that start producing those and bringing them up to scale so that they can bring the cost down and replacing our fossil fuels. So that's where the most likely transition is going to be. And again, we're still going to have, here in the U.S., we have 250 million vehicles on the road. And Europe is similar. China is growing. So we have so many vehicles that are on our world streets, so to speak, that we're never. Well, it's going to be a very, very, very long time if we ever get rid of internal combustion. Just from the legacy vehicles that are already produced, that are on the road, that are in our driveways. So there's going to have to be some kind of transition that allows us to shift from fossil fuels to something else, and then maybe eventually work to something that is significantly cleaner or way more efficient. And again, there are a lot of opportunities out there, but I don't have a crystal ball on everything, but I will say the all above approach is the way that we're going to go. And then one thing that I didn't even mention is compressed natural gas. A lot of commercial vehicles use compressed natural gas. So that's another element that we're looking into. It burns a lot cleaner. Yes, it is a fossil fuel, but again, there are elements of that are very attractive from, just a sustainability standpoint. We have a lot of infrastructure in place for that, but again, it is a carbon producer. So we are looking at things that are more carbon neutral, at least as we build out the future of these programs.
That's all great. But you did say that you don't have a crystal ball on everything. What do you have a crystal ball on?
Well, I do know that there are certain entities. I'm not going to say whether they're industry or what they are, but some of them are, they have a defined timeline on when they're moving to biofuels or e-fuels or fuel cells or whatever the case might be. And obviously, we want to match the industry needs with the programs that we're providing for these students so that we're not teaching them something that's antiquated. So as we meet with these industry representatives, whether they're on our rules committee or on a steering committee or whatever the case might be, they can provide us with guidance, and then we can kind of formulate the rules and create a succession plan as we start moving towards those alternate fuel programs. So whether it's fuel cells or e-fuels or biofuels, whatever, there's a lot of different areas that we're going to be pushing into to again help provide that initial training for those students, so when they do walk through the doors of industry, they can hit the ground running and be productive members of their teams.
So we kind of already talked about this throughout the interview, but are there any new ideas or plans for the CDS competitions like Aero, Baja, and Formula?
SAE has some directives that they're trying to bring in from the top down, and those are obviously automation, it's advanced manufacturing and sustainability. And when we think about sustainability, obviously our brain immediately wants to go to electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, but that's not always the case. There's a lot of other things that we can do with sustainability from a material standpoint of going into, just a standard automobile. What kind of renewable materials can you bring into an automobile, whether it's the tires, whether it's, something you can do with the fabric or the cushioning for the seats, or even the dashboard. Hey, if we use bamboo on the dashboard, as our wood grain feature, bamboo is a rapidly renewable material that grows, so quickly it can be replaced and replenished very easily. So there's a lot of different avenues of sustainability that we need to look at. And then another aspect is, the cradle to grave concept that we've been living in with regards to our automobiles. A lot of them, we keep in our driveway for 5, maybe 10, 15 years, and then we dispose of them. And they, go to the crusher, they get, some of it gets recycled or parted out, but, we don't have a great circularity within the sustainability of our transportation systems. The interesting aspect of that is the batteries, like lead acid batteries, those are highly recyclable. And so industry has put into place its own cradle to cradle system where they take old batteries and recycle them into brand new batteries that have another 5-10 year shelf life. So, they're taking the lead, they're taking the electrolytic solution and all the plastics, and out of all that, 97% roughly of a lead acid battery is recycled into brand new batteries. So that to me is something that the industry can learn from and try to replicate on a larger scale when you look at the holistic vehicle.
So, of course, we're doing a lot with college programs here, but is there any plans for a reach into high school programs?
We are looking at that. A lot of the people that are within aero design would like to see something where we actually do create a pipeline that creates the interest level from high school students so that they're thinking about, hey, aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, those type of skills are attainable. And so, yes, we're looking into that. And we're mainly looking at aero design from a couple of different reasons. One, the cost of getting into the program is relatively low. We're planning on, reaching out to some local area schools that are within a drive to where we hold the events so that they don't have a huge cost with regards to travel. So that's kind of where we're going right now. We may reach out to some other schools that have, a very focused aerospace program within their curriculum. But for right now, we're basically looking at a pilot program where some of the regional schools around the different airfields that we do the aero design event, we can go and recruit a few high schools, see if their teacher is going to be a champion for that program, and then provide them maybe with some materials and some guidance and some curriculum that can help them be successful. And, so aero design, again, from a cost perspective, it's the most logical one. From a liability perspective, it's the most logical one. From a facility perspective, it's the most logical one. So that's really where we're going, at least to reach down to the high schools and to try to bring them on board. And again, that can only improve, the whole industry that we have, or the ecosystem with regards to them stepping into colleges that are going to be participating. And maybe they won't do aero design when they go to a college. Maybe they'll do something else. But by introducing them to the SAE events, they can look at that as one of the check boxes of what college they're going to go to. There are some students that actually do that, from an engineering perspective. They're like, hey, I could go to just about any engineering school, but I chose to go to this one because of the strength of their SAE program. And that speaks volumes when you think about, trying to recruit students that are the best and the brightest. Yes, GPA matters, but when you have a program like, a strong SAE events program, they will gravitate towards those schools because they're seeing it in the news. They have a big outreach program, and the students are going to gravitate towards that.
I remember when we were talking to some University of Michigan students, they actually chose that school because of the SAE team. So, if the high school aero program does well, do you think it would eventually lead into like a ground vehicle, like a Baja high school program, or no?
Yeah, I really don't know. Again, it might lead into something, but I don't see how it would be, um, how it would lead into the larger full scale vehicles. Again, when I did the full size EV program, we were using an existing vehicle that already had safety features in place. You know, it had crumple zones, it had seat belts, it had, you know, basically everything that you needed. It had analog brakes. So it wasn't something that had to be designed into the car and, you know, again, simulated and validated. It was, you know, it was a street legal vehicle, and all of that had already been, you know, it had been crash tested. You know, the chassis had been crash tested. So I, I'm concerned that, you know, if we try to do that, you know, within a high school um, program, that we would find a lot of pushback in terms of a liability aspect. So, not that, you know, we don't care about our college students. It's just the fact that they tend to have a lot more, um, you know, project management in place. They have safety programs in place. They really do a much better job with their attention to detail on, you know, their welds and, you know, their design work that they're doing. That in most cases goes beyond the capabilities of a high school classroom. There are some high school programs out there that would probably do just fine. But I would like to say, you know, if there's a high school out there that is interested in something similar to an SAE program, I would look towards something like a super mileage event. I'm not saying that we want to push them to, you know, a different program outside of SAE, but you know, to look for something maybe regional, or maybe something that you know, makes a little bit more sense for them, you know, from a high school standpoint, because of the cost and the facilities and the liability. It's just a lot of hurdles to jump through in order to make that happen. You know, luckily, when I started the EV program in my high school classes, the risk management for my district, they actually came up to my classroom, they inspected it, they talked to me about the program, they asked a lot of questions about, you know, what the risks were, and you know, that made it a lot easier for me to implement that program. But this day and age, a lot of risk managements for districts are not going to be looking favorably to do a large vehicle program like that. I see them shying away from it, if anything.
And you were talking about, we asked about new high school, or if there were any high school programs, but any new university program competitions in the works?
Well, we're always looking for growth, and one of the things that we think that we can do with growth isn't necessarily by providing, you know, more competitions or more registrations for each event or providing more events. It's you know, when we look at growth from a workforce development lens, we're looking at engagement. So we're trying to think about programs that we can incorporate within our existing programs and embed them within our conferences that we have, you know, whether it's the commercial vehicle conference or whether it's WCX in Detroit or Aerotech. We're looking at creating some embedded events for those particular conferences. And then we're also looking at doing some workshops similar to the battery workshop that we do for the Formula EV. You know, they have a battery workshop so that the students have the skills and the training necessary to build a decent battery box for the competition. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that the teams are crossing when they get to technical inspection for that EV platform is the battery. And so they have to have, you know, the battery management system is in place. They've designed it well, you know, so that it can handle thermal management properly. And all of those are really big safety concerns when it comes to the design of those batteries. So, in terms of new programs for the university, again, we're trying to do those added engagement elements as a way to bring those students to those conferences so they can see the added benefit of being a professional member down the road and networking with all of these people that are within their same industry. And then we are looking at filling in a few other gaps. I mentioned that we need an all of the above approach for our transportation sector. Well, we really don't have anything in the biofuels or the fuel cell space, and so we're looking at hey, um, providing a fuel cell for Baja or Formula doesn't necessarily make any sense. But is there a new program that we could build out for the future that might allow for a fuel cell to be an element of that competition? And again, you're looking at a logistic problem there because there's only so many hydrogen fueling stations around that are publicly available. There's a few more that are privately accessible, but you get into the issue of, hey, if NC State wanted to do a fuel cell vehicle, they would not be able to because there's no hydrogen infrastructure here in North Carolina for them to be able to even test their car. So they'd have to pack up their car and go to Boston or California or wherever they could find a refueling station that would let them, fuel up, and then they could test their car. And that's just not something that is really practical for a team that doesn't have that infrastructure in place. So we're looking at, is there something we could do to fill that gap? So again, we provide these student teams with the curriculum and the workforce development that they can use as they transition into commercial vehicles or light duty vehicles or even the aerospace industry when we're looking at the hydrogen infrastructure and fuel cells and that sort. So there's a lot of different avenues that they want to go with hydrogen, whether it's combustion or fuel cells. And so again, there's that all of the above approach really is kind of where the industry is going, and we want to be there to help support that from a workforce development standpoint.
Well, before we wrap up, I do have one more question. Do you have a favorite employee or coworker at SAE?
And why is it Scott?
Well, that was the follow-up, obviously.
Well,
don't worry, they will not listen to this.
I honestly do not. I appreciate the guidance that everybody has given me. Again, I'm the newest member of my team, and so again, they've all helped me out, with the onboarding and becoming, familiar with every single platform from Zendesk to Teams and everything else in between. Teams isn't that different from like the Google software that we were using within my district, but still, there's a learning curve. And so, everybody has been very helpful and patient with me as I am learning the ropes. And so, no, I do not have a favorite employee, just like I don't have a favorite son or daughter. I appreciate them all in different aspects and for different reasons. And, it's great to work with them all. And, again, if everybody was the same, I mean, you wouldn't have the creativity that can help a program like this sustain itself and grow.
What hurts, David, is that we gave you